Looks good.
Yep, you can go ahead now, Leader.
Thank you, Fiona. Well, good evening, everybody, councillors and members of the public who may be watching us. My name is John Ward. I'm the leader of the council and I am chairman of this executive and therefore will be chairing this meeting. I'm supported this evening by a number of officers, the Chief Executive, Tom Horwood, Strategic Directors, Graham Clark and Annie Wrighton, and the Head of Policy and Governance, Robin Taylor, and the chap we like to have around but hope never to use, Daniel Brainbridge, the Borough Solicitor. We all have been done this for a while, but just for the want of repetition, please use the hands up feature when you wish to speak, and I will acknowledge you in the order in which I see you. If any members lose their connection, we will stop for a short while in the hope that they can regain it. And if the webcast goes down, we will stop the meeting until we can get it up and going again. First of all, first item is apologies. Fiona, I gather we have two.
Yes, Leader. Councillors Michaela Martin and Anne-Marie Rosamond.
Right, thank you very much. Declarations of interest, Fiona?
I've got one declaration from Councillor Follows, and that's a non-pecuniary interest in relation to item 6 regarding the SIL funding awards. His partner's a teacher at Rodborough School and Rodborough is one of the applicants. Thank you very much indeed.
Any other last minute declarations of interest, ladies and gentlemen? Right, thank you very much. We move on to item 3, questions from members, and I understand, Fiona, there are no questions from members.
That's correct, Leader.
Thank you very much. I'll then lead in to updates. We are still, as you can see, meeting by Zoom remotely. And as I think most of you are aware, the government has decided not to allow us to extend remote meetings after the 6th of May. This is despite a lot of pressure from the Local Government Association, the National Association of Local Councils and the District Councils Network, as well as a multitude of individual councils. So I find this extremely disappointing. And I think cross-party, cross-council, cross-everywhere, we're all disappointed at this, because at this particular time in the vaccine rollout, there are many, many people who do not feel comfortable coming into a packed council chamber. And whilst our chamber will fit in 57 people in what I might describe as relative comfort, in order to have social spacing, which is still required, we would only have room for about 1/3 of our councillors, which would mean we would either have to hire a massive tent somewhere or we would be depriving councillors of their democratic rights if we attempted to hold a meeting during May. We've therefore pulled back a lot of our business into April, which is why we have a very full agenda on April the 20th, and we have pulled back mayor making until April the 27th. To allow for this extra business, I have asked for the council meeting on the 20th of April to be pulled back to a 6 o'clock start, as we've all had relative experience of rather long council meetings, and I would hope that we can all get our business done on the 20th in order to have our bedtime cocoa before midnight. We have drafted a motion to council, which I have put out to all the other party leaders and asked for their comments on. And hopefully we will have all the comments back in fairly soon, as that will need to go on the order paper by this Thursday, i.e. in 2 days' time. I think it's something that we can all agree on, and hopefully the wording will not cause too much of a difficulty. That's really the main thing that I have to say. So I would now move on and ask Councillor Merriweather if he has any updates in his department.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, everybody. I don't have anything specific to tonight, but I'd like to invite anybody who missed last week's update to just check in and listen to what I said about New Homes Bonus, which was the review there, which is a very important matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Nothing to add since last week's update, so I'll leave it to that for this on this occasion.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Since last week's update, we've had a meeting of the Brightwells board, and I'll give a brief report on that. Crest say they're still on schedule to open the scheme in September, with the cinema opening in December. They're making progress in selling some of the residential units off plan, if you like, and they're planning to have a show unit open soon. In terms of the commercial units, they're still in discussion with Surrey County Council about modifying the development agreement to make it a bit more flexible in terms of lettings. And they did show us a map of the various units that they're in serious discussion with potential letters, but I have to say no additional ones have yet signed up. So that's a brief report on Brightwells. In terms of planning policy, I'll just mention that discussions are ongoing about the possible changes to the SPD in relation to affordable housing, and we'll be discussing that at the next full council meeting. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. The consultation on the public spaces order has now concluded. We will be looking at making proposals very shortly. The uptake of parking spaces has gradually nudged up, but it remains relatively low. We expect a surge in usage once the shops reopen next week. Look forward to reporting further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say that this week end at Frensham went well. I have reported to the executive before about some of the issues that have been happening at Frensham with inconsiderate parking and with obviously people dropping litter. We do still have issues with people lighting fires, but the extra wardens that we have now have been managing to tackle those and get people to put the fires out before obviously anything serious has taken place. So all has gone very well, and I just would like to thank the team for all their hard work on this. Thank you. Nothing else from me.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. As portfolio holder for IT, I thought I would just say a few words once more about cybersecurity and how even the largest organizations can be easy targets. This evening's example is Facebook, who have the largest database on the planet. In the last 10 years, Facebook subscribers have leapt from 250 million to a staggering 2.8 billion. Over 50% of the world's mobile phone owners are subscribers to Facebook. In 2019, they suffered a number of data breaches, including one which amounted to 533 million subscribers' data. This data was published online last week and includes phone numbers, IDs, names, locations, date of birth, account creation data. I could go on. This affected users from 106 countries, including 32 million from Italy, 11 million from this country in the UK. For all types of organizations, including local authorities, data breaches and leaks have a long-term consequence for victims. Hackers could use the data from leaks to impersonate people and commit fraud over and over. So as always, I would implore everyone to be very careful about not just security, but restricting the amount of personal information you divulge on social media and other sites. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, everyone. My short update tonight is just to mention about the Executive and this Council's commitment to long-term leisure and commercial use at the Broadwater Park site in Godalming. I met with members of Godalming Park Run this week and officers from the leisure team in order to discuss how that was going to be deployed. And we're very hopeful that Godalming Park Run will start on Broadwater Park in June. So thank you very much to Councillor Townsend and to everybody on that team for all the work they've done, and to make sure that we continue using Broadwater for the purpose that it was there for, which is a leisure facility for all residents. Thank you.
Right, thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is governance matters. There are a number of things that we have wanted to do, some for some time, which we've had to put in abeyance during the COVID crisis. And some that have just come to mind as we have viewed how this council works. There are a number of changes that we wish to make, and there are a number of things which we think should be continued in their current form. The first item is planning committees. Some time ago, this council had 5 planning committees. I believe, and whilst it's nice to be unique, I'm not sure it's right to be unique for this particular reason, but I think we are unique in England, or we were, in having 5 committees. During the COVID crisis, we had agreement to reduce them to 2 committees, an Eastern and a Western. There was certainly or almost universal wish across the council to have area-based committees, and these 2 committees, in my view and in that of my executive, have continued to work well. We did put a sunset clause in, rather like the wretched government sunset clause on the 6th of May, which stopped our remote meetings, so that unless we reviewed the situation, we would revert to 5 committees. We do not believe a reversion to 5 committees would be in anyone's interest, and we are therefore proposing that the 2 committee structure, Eastern and Western, will continue on a permanent basis. Whilst looking at committees, we then looked at our overview and scrutiny committees, of which we have 4 or 5 if you count the coordinating board. With somewhat amazement, we look at the rest of Surrey and our near neighbours in Hampshire, and we find that most of them are functioning very satisfactorily with 1 overview and scrutiny committee. So we again ask ourselves the same question that the Commission asked us when they were looking at boundaries in our area: why is Waverley so different? And frankly, we have failed to come up with an answer. So our proposal to the executive is that it agrees the principle of reducing the overview and scrutiny committees per se to 2, a corporate and a community, but that since housing has many, many facets which really need to involve members of the tenants panel and outsiders, and are not necessarily purely scrutiny functions, that we also establish a housing landlord services board, which will look at how basically our council house relationships are functioning. I should say our social housing. We thought about this and we thought that the Standards Committee could perform a much better function if it had a wider brief. So we are also looking to change the remit to make it a Standards and General Purposes Committee, whereby it can consider a number of things that don't seem to fall into any particular hole, if you like, in our working methods. And we think that expanding the brief of the Standards Committee is probably a good thing. Looking at that, I am old enough in the council to remember what used to be called SIGs, special interest groups. which were effectively small working groups set up by the executive or by a portfolio holder to look at particular items to bring forward to the executive. And we are effectively looking to reinstate that in some form of executive working group, and that is also part of our recommendation on governance. And the final part of our recommendation on governance is to ask the Standards Committee to carry out a general review of our constitution, tie up many of the loose ends that are still there for various changes, and generally do a tidy up. So we are giving the Standards Committee a very broad term of reference and a very broad amount of things that we would like them to do. But quite definitely, we require 2 planning committees and 2 ONS committees. That's all I want to say on the matter, and I understand there are 2 speakers on this, and the first one is Councillor Jerry Hyman. Councillor Hyman, you have 4 minutes from now.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I fully appreciate the issue with the sunset clause on the planning committee's situation, and I don't think that there's any reason why we shouldn't continue with what we've got for the time being. It seems to be working. We don't know the extent to which it'll be working with the changes that the government intend to make in the future, but obviously it's something to keep an eye on. But what really concerns me, I suppose, here is that it appears that you're giving the Standards Committee a remit of sorting out problems where we're not actually being told what the problems are. We're told at the beginning of item 5 that it's about improving open and participative governance. And towards the end of the item, at the end of the report at 4.5.1, it says that we need to make sure that the Constitution is fit for purpose. But I'm not entirely sure that anything has been identified in terms of what the problems are that the executive see as being necessary to resolve, or what improvements need making, what things are wrong with the Constitution as it stands, which need to be improved in order to be able to achieve our corporate goals, which is obviously really the reason that we've got a constitution in place, is to achieve the aims and the purpose of the council. So I just wondered, is it possible for you? It also tells us in there that the Standards Committee will have responsibility, and with responsibility goes accountability. One of the problems that we have at the council, really, as far as that I've identified over the past 20 years, is that we don't have adherence to the Constitution. It isn't a problem with the Constitution itself particularly, but we don't have any accountability or responsibility. And there's an implication in here that the Standards Committee is going to be responsible and accountable for something, but I'd like it to be explained, please, what it is the committee would be accountable for, and what the purpose of that is. But what problems really will we be trying to resolve? There's no timeline involved other than the immediate things that need to be done. I'm a bit concerned about the issues of the overview and scrutiny committees being changed around without perhaps looking further at the reasons why there is no real appetite at the council for scrutiny, because this certainly doesn't address the issues of appetite. But what problems are we trying to resolve, please, Leader? What changes do we want to make in order to improve things? And why? What are those things that we're trying to improve, particularly, so that we know whereabouts we're headed with this? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that all you wish to say? Fine. I have now Councillor John Gray, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just making a couple of observations on this tonight. I mean, if you go to the planning one, the change from 5 to 2 was quite significant. I can understand why the executive have put this forward, but what I would have liked to have seen is some of the benefits that members and officials have got out of moving to 2 committees, and some of the issues that have raised. There was a number of concerns raised originally about having area committees, and would that or would it not be lost going into the 2 committees. I hear that you're happy for this to be reviewed further down the line, but I think it would be very useful if we'd had some observations documented on the success or otherwise of the trial period before we make it permanent. The second point on the OS Coordinating Committee, I'm not aware, I mean, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not aware that you've gone and discussed with the ONS Coordinating Board and what their views are, because this is quite a change. I understand, again, I understand the needs to simplify meeting structures, especially in the post-COVID period of time, or not even post-COVID, while we're still coping with it, so that we've got less physical meetings to basically go to. But I haven't seen the input from the existing structures of the ONS boards and their input into this, and I would have expected it. And the last point's on the question of Standards Committee constitution review, something which I do agree with, but I know there's been an extensive governance review that was carried out under the chairmanship of the deputy leader. And I wonder what objectives you have going forward that came out of that you wanted the constitution to address. I couldn't find a lot within the papers that covered that, but I think it would be very useful if this, I think 18 months worth of work wasn't somehow encapsulated and fed into your issues, concerns, or otherwise on the Constitution. Thank you, Leader. Nice, simple questions for you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Well, I will endeavour to answer your and Councillor Hyman's questions when I sum up at the end, but your very last question might be happily dealt with by Councillor Paul Follows, who has got his hand up.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I will try to address some of those points raised by Councillor Hyman and Councillor Gray in particular. I think if the rest of the executive has no issue with it, I think we could have a paragraph on what sort of reasons we have for wanting to change these things when it comes to council. I think we can all articulate that, so it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to articulate that for other members to think about as well. The discussion we had, the governance group that we had at the beginning of the administration, its particular aim was to actually look at committee system versus cabinet, which was something that the administration parties resolved to have a look at the beginning. We did resolve that the cabinet model was still most appropriate for Waverley, and I think that was shared by the majority of members of that working group. But it was also an opportunity for us to look at different structures at different councils in lots of different places. And certainly the thing that chimed with me is that we do have a lot more committees than almost anybody else. And you can take party politics straight out of it right away. Most of the councils in the south of England are Conservative, but most of them have many, many fewer committees than we do here at Waverley. And that's where we kind of started that look. And I think the thing I would probably stress here is that everything that we're suggested has been very, very heavily evidence-based. I'm sure you won't be the only one who has noticed that at ONS, there are always several members of the executive there. I think I've missed only 2 in the entire cycle, because one of the things we wanted to do was observe what's actually going on at ONS. And the leader certainly articulated this in some of his statements over the last 3 to 6 months, with wanting clearer updates as to what ONS were actually doing in terms of recommendations and decisions that they were making. And part of the reasons that I and several other people were going is because we wanted to try and understand that too, because we didn't see a lot of output. I think the issues that we're going to get down to here is the conflation of the number of committees. The number of committees having very little relationship to the quality and quantity of decision making. You don't need 10 committees, you need 2 or 3 good ones. And this is kind of really what we're trying to do here. Yes, I suppose we possibly need to articulate the benefits of the current system of planning that we've been operating over the last year. But at the same time, 5 planning committees were never particularly articulated to me in terms of their benefits either. And, you know, how far down do you go in that area model? Do we start having committees for tiny little portions of Waverley? In my Godalming Town Council hat, myself and Steve Williams had to bring back the Town Council's committee because somebody abolished it. There are levels and places to have lots of committees, but is Waverley really the place to have 5 different ones? I'm less certain of that. Moving on to scrutiny very quickly. One of the things that I would note with that is that just on a basic level, it's pretty incompatible with the corporate strategy. And so just on that level alone, there needs to be a sort of rethink about what they're called, as well as what they do. I observed within the course of one cycle, the same subject be discussed in 3 places, in some cases trying to summon the same people, the same officers, and in one case, the same police person to different meetings to discuss the same thing, with a grand total of 0 recommendations coming from any of the committees that discussed it. And this is the sort of thing that's gone on several times throughout this cycle. So really what we want to do here is empower the Standards Committee to think about it, set the direction at this level, but then ask the Standards Committee to think about it and come back with proposals, ideally as soon after the county elections as possible, so we can trial it for the next couple of years. And to see how that works. I think we'd all be inclined at the end of each cycle for the chairs and vice chairs of the new ONSs to come and meet with executive at exec brief once every 6 weeks, so that we could have the sorts of discussions about what their work is that we think would be valuable, and just depoliticize the ONS structure and make it genuinely a scrutiny session. I think that would also address the point Councillor Hyman raised about appetite for scrutiny. Because were I not a member of the executive, I would not have been leaping to volunteer to be a part of any of the scrutiny sessions that I sat through over the last 2 years. And I quite legitimately have to try and convince some members of my own group to be on those committees when that's the sorts of things they have to deal with. So I think this is going to benefit everybody, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. I think it's going to get some flack, but we really do have to try and make the council work more efficiently for residents, because that's why we're all here. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. I now have Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. As one of the 2 members of the executive responsible for planning with Councillor Palmer, I'd just like to comment on the recommendation to do with planning committees, if I may. I have discussed, in terms of Councillor Gray's points about benefits, I have discussed this with the Chief Planning Officer, actually, Zach Elwood, and he sees that one of the main benefits is reduced officer support. If you've got 5 committees, you're dealing with 5 chairmen, 5 deputy chairmen, 5 meetings to attend and so on. And that requires clearly a lot more officer support than just dealing with 2 committees, even if you've got the same number of applications to deal with. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit seems to be consistency. It's important that we're consistent across the various committees, and it's easier to have inconsistency across 2 committees than across 5. I'd also like to comment on, add to some of what Councillor Hyman said, actually. He rightly pointed to the fact that there's a director of travel coming from the government, of more decisions being taken by planning officers rather than by planning committees. They see that as a way of unblocking housing permissions and so on. Now, I don't necessarily agree with their thinking of what they're trying to do, but that's the direction of travel, and that's pretty likely the way it's going to go. So going back to 5 committees would be going in the opposite direction from that. The other point I'd make about direction of travel, and this is a speculative comment really, if we do get into any form of unitarisation, whether it's one unitary for Surrey or perhaps 3, and we're joining up with 2 other district councils to form a smaller unitary, we're not going to have, say, 15 committees across a 3-council unitary council. So I think we'd be badly positioned if we went into any discussions about forming the sort of unitary that we might want with 5 planning committees. Sorry. So these are the reasons why I feel that this recommendation is appropriate and why I fully support it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no more hands up from members of the executive, so I will wind up briefly. I think the point has been made that quantity does not trump quality. And we believe that with 2 committees, be they planning or be they overview and scrutiny, that the keener, the more interested, the more hard-working councillors will be attracted to those two committees, and that we will get a better result from all of them, and something that is generally more competent. On the officer front, the point has been well made that sometimes the same officers and the same people are going to 3, or I think in one case 4 different ONS committees, which is a catastrophic waste of officer time, very debilitating and very demoralizing for officers and portfolio holders to have to represent the same thing time after time to different groups of people. It just does not make sense. Touching on Councillor Hyman's question about problems, we are asking the Standards Committee just to have an overall look at the Constitution and come up with some ideas for improving it. The specific problems, if we can call them problems, are the number of planning committees and the number of ONS committees, which we have laid out very clearly what we want to do. We've also laid out very clearly that we'd like executive working groups to continue. So we are giving them a definite steer on the things that we feel need to be done, but we are also giving them encouragement to look at things that they might find that they think that they should recommend back to council to change. So it is specific in very many ways, the things that we really feel ought to be done, and it is more open in other ways, not necessarily because there are problems, but let's call them refinements that they may wish to suggest to the Constitution. So that's really where we are at the moment. Save officer time and quality, not quantity, and a relatively open encouragement to look at the Constitution in a wide-ranging way. I thought of putting all these to the executive for one vote, which would be perhaps a good thing to do, but I will be talking to you forever then, so I thought I might have a short break in my voice and we'll just go through the 5 items one by one, which I will read in full for the benefit of the webcast and the future. First part of item 5, the executive recommends to full council that the temporary Western and Eastern Planning Committee arrangements, first incorporated into the Constitution on the 22nd of July 2020 by full council and extended on 20th of October 2020 by full council, be made permanent or until such time as full council resolves to make any further changes to them with the current terms of reference, and that the head of policy and governance be authorized to make the corresponding revisions to the Constitution in conjunction with the chairman of the Standards Committee. Members of the executive, may I put that to you, and may I have a red or green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much, Fiona. If everyone could put their hands down, we will go to the second part. The executive recommends to full council that it agrees to the principle of moving to a governance structure whereby Waverley Borough Council no longer operates 4 overview and scrutiny committees, but instead operates 2 overview and scrutiny committees, namely corporate and community, and a new Housing Landlord Services Board, whilst retaining the existing constitutional ability to establish informal ONS working groups as set out in section 4.2, and asks the Standards Committee to develop and recommend to full council for adoption the necessary proposed constitutional amendments to achieve this change, including terms of reference for the new committees. Ladies and gentlemen of the executive, may I have red or green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much, Fiona. The next part, the executive recommends to full council that it agrees to the principle of moving to a governance structure whereby Waverley Borough Council extends the remit of the existing Standards Committee to become a Standards and General Purposes Committee, which, as well as dealing with the standards and constitutional issues it currently does, would also take responsibility for a range of other functions and pick up issues that arise over the course of time that do not obviously sit elsewhere, as laid out in section 4.3, and asks the Standards Committee to develop and recommend to full council for adoption the necessary proposed constitutional amendments to achieve this change. Members of the executive, may I have your votes, please?
It's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you, Fiona. Also, the executive recommends to full council that it agrees to the principle of reintroducing the capacity of the executive working groups to be constituted in order to shape and give policy development across a range of portfolio areas as set out in section 4.4, and asks the Standards Committee to develop and recommend to full council for adoption the necessary proposed constitutional amendments to achieve this change. Ladies and gentlemen, can we vote, please?
All in favour, Leader.
Thank you, Fiona. And finally, that the executive asks the Standards Committee to carry out a general and comprehensive review of the Constitution to ensure it remains fit for purpose and to bring forward to full council any proposed constitutional amendments arising from its review as set out in section 4.5. Members of the executive, can we vote on that, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much, Fiona. That is the end of item 5. So we will move to item 6, which is Community Infrastructure Levy, and will be led by Councillor Nick Palmer.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'd like first to thank my colleagues across party in the SIL Advisory Committee. The discussions lasted more than 8 hours over 3 days, and we examined every proposal in detail. I'm delighted to say that we arrived at unanimity, and every member of the committee played a very helpful and constructive part. We were guided, first of all, by the need to comply with government regulations on how SIL should be operated. Secondly, we were keen to apply the criteria that we had set out on the website rather than follow whatever our own inclinations might be, so that we had a process which was transparent and that people could see that the decisions being made were made in accordance with the guidelines that we set out. Those guidelines could be modified in the light of experience. We'll review that as part of our general review going forward. Some of the applications were for projects which seemed to us clearly desirable, but for the reasons set out in the papers did not at present meet the requirements. That does not rule out the possibility of a fresh application. And I'd like to draw attention in particular to a desirability of showing strong community support, where possible, including match funding, so that the council gets the maximum value for money in terms of public satisfaction for the funds that we're allocating. What will happen next, if the proposals are approved, is that officers will work with the successful applicants to help implement the projects, including any conditions or provision of match fund that may be necessary to enable them to move forward. Next month, the SIL Committee will meet again to discuss the next steps and to decide when the next round of decisions will be made. I don't want to anticipate what we decide there, but I will say that our inclination is to encourage people to submit proposals when they're ready to submit them, rather than for a specific deadline. And that from time to time, the committee will then meet to decide which of the proposals that come in should be recommended for further funding. But we'll give more details of the process after we've reviewed this next month. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have one speaker listed for this, Councillor Carol Coburn.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to the board for your hard work. I'm here to speak up for the board, as you'd expect, and also perhaps to flag up one or two consequences that perhaps the board hasn't been as aware of as we are locally. The board does not sit back and do nothing. We've got a conservation group, we've got an active residents association, we've got a beautification project. We work with Surrey, we got the Crossroads all organised with Surrey. We went out, we fundraise. We've got entrance gates as you come into the village, all done as a result of the community working together. We, when the St Martin's Hall was in danger, we bought St Martin's Hall. I now chair that committee and we run it for the community. So what we have here is a very active borough, and we've worked closely with Matt Lang on the Bourne Green for years, and I really do mean years. And we've had some successful projects working the town council, all these other groups with trees and bins and all the usual things you get on a green, because the Bourne Green is, as we've always said, it's the heart and soul of the Bourne, and everybody goes there. It doesn't matter what time of day you go, you will see a whole range of people, some in groups, some individuals, all enjoying it. So the Bourne is essential. And we have in the Bourne this awful pavilion. Now, for 5 years, the Bourne has been working with Waverley to improve this pavilion. And we had the luxury of a very kind gentleman who wanted to put back something into sport and leisure in the Bourne. And he very kindly financed an awful lot of the work that went into putting in the planning application for the new Bourne Pavilion at no cost to Waverley, and also helped us when we had to move the pavilion forward a bit, which gave us problems with common land. So we have worked on this project with Waverley for many a long year. One of the, we know we scored well in terms of community because we want to provide a community hub. We want people from 0 to 100 and goodness knows what to be able to use this facility. And as I say, it's been 5 years in the anticipation of this. When we put the bid in, we were told to put the big money in. We didn't want all that money. We wanted a small amount of money to kickstart the planning application. We have a planning application which went through, as I say, with Waverley's support, which expires in May 21. Very soon it expires. And a small amount of funding would have enabled us to do the disabled access, which we'll have to do. If we don't do it, we'll probably have to shut the pavilion because we cannot run a pavilion where we can't let everybody in. So what we have at the moment, as I say, is a situation whereby the funding we thought was in place is not in place. We hoped we would get a little bit of kickstart funding from Waverley, do the disabled access, maintain the planning application, and then, of course, saying that we had Waverley behind us, we would go out and look for other funding and do some fundraising. So we feel a little bit as though we've been sort of abandoned just at the last minute here, having worked so closely with Waverley to get this far. Not to get a penny out of the sill was a bit of a surprise, I have to say, especially as I say, as we knew we scored highly with the officers. We didn't want all the money, and we were advised to put in that large fund. We didn't put that in, that is the cost, but we were advised to do that. So as things stand at the moment, we have an asset on the Bourne Green, which is for the last 5 years has just festered because we thought we had everything in place. It has fallen into a terrible state of disrepair. So we are going to have on that green a Waverley asset which has deteriorated probably beyond saving, and all because we didn't get a little bit of project funding. Yes, I could go on about the board, and I'm sorry, Councillor Ward, as you know, it is God's chosen place. But I will wrap up there and say, you know, we were never looking for £950,000. We were looking for a little bit of prime funding to get that disabled access to maintain the planning application, which will fall in May. Very sad situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader, and I'm sure Councillor Palmer will address Councillor Coburn's specific queries on this, although my understanding is that out of a pot of 1.261, the bid from the Bourne was 947,000. So I think on that level, I think we've got to understand what the reason for that is, but it does seem clearly there was either some miscommunication or misunderstanding somewhere in the process. But I'm sure Councillor Palmer can respond to that. I'll just go through, first off, commending the members of the SIL board for the amount of time and effort they've put into this. Clearly very good work in terms of the outcomes. Lots of very sensible suggestions. Certainly very pleased to see Rodborough's pitch on there finally. A lot of these sorts of 3G pitches, the same at the Glevelands school. They are by other sources like the FA, which is exactly the point of this. It's not to fund projects 50, 60, 90% of a project. It's to give that little extra bit to get it going, get it the line, and do that in a lot of places here. I'm also very pleased to see the Guildford to Godalming Greenway get its chunk of the funding as well, because I think that's an extremely valuable project that is something that's going to really help the climate agenda for Waverley Borough Council and Godalming Town Council. So very pleased to see that. Lots of good things on here, but also lots of good things on the list in terms of bids not recommended for funding this time. There are lots of good things clearly in the pipeline, and the SIL group, the SIL board, clearly this is their first time doing this with Waverley, so it's been a good opportunity to get all the processes and understanding in place for everybody to move into the next round. And I think if we've got some good quality bids coming forward that might just be needing to rejig their bids in various ways or looking at alternative sources of funding to get themselves over the line for next time, there's a good list here building up. And certainly the Whitley Rec play area, Godalming College, lots of things about the libraries and provision of nursery schools. There's lots of good stuff on this list for next time round. So hopefully now we've got all the policies and processes in place for SIL and its governance, the next round won't be quite so painful for all of you poor people having to struggle on the SIL board. But thank you for your work, and I'll be very wholeheartedly supporting these.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no other hands up from the executive. So, Councillor Palmer, would you like to wind up, please?
Yes, thank you. And many thanks to Councillor Coburn and Councillor Follows for their comments. I'm sorry to hear about the difficulties of the Bourne project. And it is possible that there were communication issues along the way. I can't really respond to that on the fly, but I would encourage Councillor Coburn and the organisers of the project to engage in discussion with officers on the best way forward. This is a classic example where the SIL board felt very sympathetic to the objectives. We did understand that the application was for the full amount. And I will say that if the application had been for a partial amount with a speculation that money would be then found elsewhere, I think it might have fallen on those grounds as well, because we did take the view that we wanted projects where the match funding was actually in place rather than speculative. So I don't want to extend the discussion too much at this point, because one thing, Councillor Coburn can't respond at this particular moment, but I'd be happy to talk with her and with officers and see what the best way forward is. Councillor Follows' comments are also very helpful. I like him. I think it was a learning experience for all of us, but actually quite a pleasurable one. I think working with good colleagues on a constructive committee, which will produce results for the community, it's kind of why we're all here. We, at election time, we like to say we're campaigning for this or that party, but in the end, the reason we're here is to try and help the community. And it's actually easier to see that in something like the allocation of community funds than in some of our more arcane discussions on structure and other more academic issues. Going forward, I think that we will continue to improve the process, and I really don't mind if it takes quite a few hours to do it properly. But I hope that in the light of the experience we've had, we will, both applicants and board and executive, benefit from the experience and make it steadily improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. I will therefore put the recommendation to the executive. It is recommended that the executive agree the recommendations of the SIL Advisory Board and approve the allocations of strategic SIL funding to the projects as set out in the report, subject to the completion of the final relevant checks and the signing of funding agreements, the detail of which is delegated to the strategic director in consultation with the portfolio holder for operations and environmental services. Members of the executive, can I have red or green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We now move on to item 7, a property matter, lease of land for a substation with associated cabling and easements in Farnham. And this will be presented by Councillor Andy MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Members, if you look at your papers at page 25, it explains the reason for this paper. It's to seek approval from the executive to grant a lease to the electricity network company to enable them to install an additional electricity substation within the Brightwell site. Now, the reasons, if you look on the next page 26, you'll see under 4.2, it explains the reasons for this. We had already approved 4 substations, but the additional one is to enable Crest Nicholson to change from gas provision in the residential units for heating to electrical provision. Now, the whole reason for this is the government has decided that it wants to phase out gas boilers by 2033. And as we know, they're tending to bring these new provision forward as they did with their electric cars. So Crest Nicholson have quite sensibly decided not to install gas boilers. I mean, this scheme will be developed over a number of years, and the units will be sold over a number of years, and they'd find it increasingly difficult to sell flats with gas boilers towards the end of the time they're selling these things, because people would have to realize they'd have to replace their boilers within a few years. So it's a very sensible thing to do for Crest to do. And Crest, incidentally, although it's not part of this paper, they've decided now also to install some solar panels for heating and electricity generation within the scheme as well, which is another good thing that they're doing. So there's no reason at all not to approve this. I would recommend to the executive that they go along with the recommendations in this paper, Leader. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody has about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no speakers listed, but I have a hand up from Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. And if I may ask Councillor MacLeod a question through you, if that's acceptable. I apologise, Councillor MacLeod, to ask you this because I know it's something that you actually asked of Crest. I know back several years ago there was a campaign locally in Farnham, which a number of people here and in the community were part of, to encourage sustainable energy on the site.
Yes.
And were told flatly by Crest that it was impossible. So whilst I'm pleased to see this, is there anything that's materially changed to make it possible when previously it was impossible to do?
Well, I think it's, to be honest, Councillor, it's an economic decision. It probably wasn't impossible. They felt it, or they claimed it was impossible several years ago, and it's now possible because they really have to do it. I'm trying to represent them as positively as I can, to be honest, in order to help them, with the Brightwell site. But you made a valid point. They did say 2 or 3 years ago that it was impossible, and we need to go back to the people who are campaigning and let them know that's now happening, and we'll present that as a positive thing for the scheme. But it's a valid point you're making.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. As always, the art of the possible, a moving feast, and I'm sure those who were campaigning for it will be very pleased to see it happen, whatever the reasons. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no more hands up. Do you wish to say anything by way of winding up, Councillor McLeod?
No, just I would support the recommendation in the paper, Leader. You will no doubt wish to read it out, so I would certainly support it.
I'm not sure I wish to read it out. I take it as a heavy burden of the office to exercise my tonsils. But it does seem sensible for me to read it, since it's my executive. The recommendation is that the executive to seek approval. The executive authorises the grant of a new lease to Electricity Network Company Limited and easements for the electricity substation and cabling on terms proposed in what is an exempt Annex 1. Members of the executive, can I have red or green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader, so that's passed.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Executive members, there are no further items on the agenda. There is no necessity to go into exempt, so the meeting is closed, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader.